Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, June 25th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about some news from yesterday. No, not the New York City mayoral race. We're talking about Governor J.B. Pritzker of the state of Illinois, a potential 2028 presidential contender, announcing that he is running for a third term in 2026, as the Illinois Constitution does permit for his candidacy. Now, this decision to run for re-election really does mark what many people see as the first step for a J.B. Pritzker presidential bid. Somebody who has been floated before as a potential candidate to run against Joe Biden back in 2024 in the Democratic Party and in the Democratic primary has now been seen as a potential contender in the 2028 presidential election. Now, J.B. Pritzker has been someone who has been floated for quite some time now, depending on what he was going to do. Many people were seeing, does he have what it takes to be the next president of the United States? But the first step is always, what is the stepping stone? What is the way to maintain political dominance and political relevance in a day and age where almost everything seems to be thrown out the window of traditional Democratic politics? Now, last night's primary, as I said, we weren't going to talk about the New York City mayoral race, but we do have to touch on it because last evening's election showed the Democrats are looking for something new. In one of the states, in one of the nation's largest cities, the largest city, might I add, with 8.3 million residents, the Democratic primary last evening was a big pushback against the Democratic Party establishment, with Mamdani defeating Andrew Cuomo in a massive upset and a victory that will likely be larger than Eric Adams's was back in 2021. And the reason why that is important is, like I said, Democrats are looking for something new, and Governor J.B. Pritzker, in some cases, might be able to offer a different, renewed vision for the Democratic Party. Now, he also might not, and the 2028 race is still very much not underway, and he might not even be running for president of the United States. But it certainly is noteworthy that in a certain sense, a governor who typically would serve 2 terms, then retire and move into the out-of-politics life or run for Senate or run for something else, has decided now that he's going to be running for a 3rd term, which would set him up to have his name back on the ballot in 2026 and a more known national profile to run for president in 2028. Now, the Illinois governor's race is not one that is expected to be competitive whatsoever, so there won't be that much invested in the race. But the little-known fact, or I guess well-known fact, about J.B. Pritzker is that he is a billionaire, and many members of his family are too. J.B. Pritzker is worth $3.7 billion. Many members of his family are worth billions of dollars as well, but the reason I pointed out is because he is one of the few and far between billionaire politicians in elected office today. Donald Trump is one of them. J.B. Pritzker is another. Michael Bloomberg was another back when he was running for president. But this time around, the reason why that is important is because he will likely have a huge set of funds to use on the 2028 presidential race. And he actually has used a lot of his personal money before. Back in 2022, the Illinois governor race went favorably for J.B. Pritzker, largely because Pritzker was willing to do what many Democrats would not even have dared to try, which was meddle in a GOP primary. In 2022, it largely paid off, not just in Illinois, but across the country. Democrats and many Democratic groups did, in fact, invest in Republican primaries to nominate the weakest candidates. Many Democrats were hoping and advocating for Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. He lost his race there. Many Democrats were hoping and advocating for Herschel Walker in Georgia, and he lost there. In the state of Arizona, same thing with Blake Masters. They were looking for weaker candidates, and weaker candidates they found. Especially in a number of House races, we saw coordinated Democratic campaigns focusing on nominating lackluster Republicans who would then go on to lose districts and lose races that Donald Trump had won just 2 years prior. It was a coordinated campaign, a strong one, and one that paid off by the time the election results came through. And J.B. Pritzker was one of those Democrats, one of the Democrats that was willing to do what many people typically had seen as wrong to do, meddling in a primary of your opposition party. Why would you do that? But when you take a look at the list of candidates on the Republican side, it was Darren Bailey who J.B. Pritzker wanted to run against. And although Donald Trump endorsed Darren Bailey, we actually saw that J.B. Pritzker invested a lot of money in this race. Pritzker spent $30 million to push him Darren Bailey, the Republican nominee for governor, to be the Republican nominee for governor. It reminds me a lot of when you find all of those House races that you wonder, how could Republicans lose a Trump plus 10 district? Well, when you nominate J.R. Majewski, who lied about his military service, who Democrats knew and then pushed him to be the nominee because it helped them in the general election, you start to see your answer come through. And for Darren Bailey, who went on into the race to lose by about double digits, 12 points, in the race sure was a little bit closer than 2018, but anything was going to be closer than 2018. This result was good for Pritzker, and he made it good. It wasn't just simple circumstance that he ran against the weakest nominee for the GOP. It is because he was willing to compete in places that many Democrats would have completely written off, using the old playbook of just simply letting it be. Because Republicans, too, like to involve themselves in Democratic primaries. They comment on it. In some cases, they push candidates. In some cases, they run ads. And Democrats have started to do the same thing. And so for J.B. Pritzker now, somebody who very clearly has at least a campaign team and clearly himself has a level of political savvy that I think many Democrats have yet to tap into, this is noteworthy that he wants to run for a third term. Because I think it does set him up to potentially run in 2028. And I think furthermore, looking at the 2028 race, one thing that will be very important is that in a multi-way race, a lot of it is about funding and a lot of it is about name ID. If Pritzker can use this governor bid and being in this position in the day and age of Donald Trump's administration, it helps you better to be someone who can actively say, my state is doing this while the country is doing this. It's the same way that Gavin Newsom, and you can see it, has already started to build up way higher name ID on social media, doing so on press hits, going to traditional and new media, doing podcasts. And whether you agree with it or not, the more that people know his name, the better off he is in the Democratic primary. Because somebody with name ID of 40% nationwide is not going into a 15-person race and coming out on top. That's not how things work on the national stage. And either way, it takes a combination of high name ID, high visibility, obviously, but also funding, but also the backing and also the experience. Looking back to the 2020 Democratic primary, I am reminded of stellar speakers, orators, people that you would think traditionally would be good for the Democratic Party, but they lost the nomination to somebody who we could have foretold 3 years out was going to be the Democratic nominee for president. The 2020 election was won by Joe Biden, and one that we could have said from the very early on who was going to be the nominee and who was likely going to win the election. I have a video up from 2017, July 2017, where I said in this hypothetical, Biden and Harris would be on a ticket together. It's a little bit piece of my lore that, 3 years before the decision was actually made by the Biden campaign, I thought it was pretty painstakingly obvious that it was going to be Biden, and that if Biden was there, he was going to choose Harris. And looking at who ran, though, again, back to that point, you have to think there's a lot of people here that now would break away and do quite well in a Democratic primary. People like Pete Buttigieg, who was largely seen as inexperienced and not ready to be president, but somebody that people clearly liked. For J.B. Pritzker, in this case, what could happen for him is that he uses these 2.5 terms going into 2028 as that means to build up his experience and name ID and also invest heavily into his race, whether from fundraising or personal fortune, whatever it might be. The point is that he already has that in the primary. And so that is something that we have to keep in mind as well. And so I think it is always news when candidates decide that they're running for something or not. I covered when Gretchen Whitmer decided that she wasn't going to run for Senate in Michigan. To which I thought that very clearly also was an indicator. She couldn't run for governor. That was also an indicator that she wanted to run for president because she's young enough, right? In political terms, young, could run for something, opts against it, someone who very clearly still wants to maintain the national profile, founded a political action committee, endorsed candidates from Arizona to across other parts of the nation. The point is that Gretchen Whitmer was and still remains to be so involved, and that was the indicator. And that was news, and that is news, right? Pritzker announcing he's running for a third term. Are you kidding me? One, it's a fallback in case he doesn't get the nomination. But two, absolutely indicates that he isn't done with politics. Again, governors typically tap out after 2 terms. Same thing for president of the United States. Obviously, they're now constitutionally required to do so. But before that constitutional amendment, every president had done thus forth, right? Said, I'm running for just 2 terms. And for J.B. Pritzker to announce he's running for a 3rd term, I think does indicate he's not done with electoral politics. He really likes it. And also, he is one of the few Democrats that we have seen in recent memory who is willing to invest personal fortune and also do the tactics that Republicans had been doing for decades and getting involved in ways that traditional Democratic politicking might have said is against the standard that Democrats had set for themselves. In many cases, Democrats have unilaterally disarmed. Over the past 4 years, you have seen it. Whether it comes down to Senate procedure, when it comes down to redistricting, Democrats have said constantly that they are taking the moral high ground on things. But moral high ground does not win you elections. And if Republicans are on a playing field and you are completely removing yourself from it, they're going to walk all over you. Same thing for Republicans. Democrats are playing on a playing field. They're going to walk all over on you if you are not competing where they are already winning. And so that's the thing about Pritzker. I do think that when it comes down to how he has involved himself and entrenched himself in Illinois politics, it's not a shock to me that he wants to run for a 3rd term. Not at all. His lieutenant governor, he's about to make her the next United States Senator. Obviously very impressive on her own, but is bankrolling that campaign. I mean, that is well documented. We know that's what's happening. And so for him to stay involved in the electoral sphere and to stay involved and relevant as governors become increasingly, and mayors too, with Mamdani too, more relevant in the Donald Trump era of politics yet again, this makes sense. He started with Trump 1 in 2018. You can see that in the race. 2018. Won against a Republican incumbent by 16 points in 2018. Sorry. 16 points against an incumbent Republican governor who had just won 4 years prior. You can take a look. Under the Obama era, was able to flip the governorship. Won it by 3.9%. 4 years prior, 2010, Democrats had just barely gotten by, but it was a short-lived time for Democrats at that point in the Illinois governorship, but 4 years later, none other than J.B. Pritzker to bring it back. And thinking, too, about how close Illinois was on the national stage compared to 2022, arguably speaking, 2022 should have been closer than 2024. We saw that in a number of states. 2021 even, I remember. Take a look. Virginia went to the GOP. Harris won it by 6. New Jersey was won by 3. Harris won it by 6. Right? When you take a look, 2022, in many cases, though, did have those overperformances because of the type of candidates that Republicans were running against. Kerry Lake in Arizona, remarkably weak. Right? Doug Mastriano, remarkably weak. Tudor Dixon, remarkably weak. Sure, Tim Michels, Trump endorsed. Evers was also strong. But I do think it is impressive at baseline, and as it is for Whitmer and Shapiro and for Hobbs, for being able to win states that Harris saw underperform for the Democratic Party, and also, too, these overperformances do spell something out, at least for what it means on the national stage. Now, I do think that 2026 will be a good indicator as well to see how well J.B. Pritzker can do. Can he outperform his 2018 margin against a Republican incumbent? If he does so, that's also quite impressive because 2026 is not set up to be a 2018 type year, at least not yet. And if he does end up in a 3rd term, and people get very tired of their governors, I mean, this is something that is very well documented. That's why in 2014 that Democrats lost a number of governorships that they otherwise might have been able to win. Illinois is a state that Obama had just won by 25 points 2 years prior, and yet a Republican's winning it. Massachusetts is a state that Obama had just won by 25 points prior, and yet Baker, the Republican, just won. Maryland is a state, my home state, that Obama had just won by 25 points prior, and guess what? Elected a Republican governor. People get tired of incumbent parties, and they get tired of their governors, and 2026 will be an indicator. But I think this is the clearest indication, if we have seen anyone yet, that a major name will be staying involved in the political sphere beyond what is traditionally expected of politicians in the current day, in the present day. And I think it is an indicator, if anything, that he wants to run for president of the United States. And so 2028 will be a very interesting race because for many of these candidates, the race has already begun. For Newsom, getting on there, doing all of these things to build up publicity, obviously is a preliminary position to run for president of the United States. All of these listening tours that many of these Democrats have gone on to, all of these public hits, all of the things and statements they are making currently when it comes down to Donald Trump's mass deportations. When it comes down to Donald Trump's foreign policy, Iran is becoming a very important thing, a very important issue that many Democrats are now talking about. Because involvement in foreign policy and involvement back in the Middle East after Donald Trump said no more wars is certainly something for them to talk about and something for them to push back upon. You're seeing a lot of governors issue statements in relation to everything that this administration is doing. And I think a lot of it is because many of these governors, many of these senators, many of these representatives and other electeds want to run for president. And so I think right now where we're at is that as the Illinois race heats up, J.B. Pritzker is going to start building out a national profile. Don't be shocked if in 3 months from now, all of a sudden he's showing up on your Twitter feed and in Politico and in the New York Times and all of these different things, because that is how you start competing. Because Donald Trump's presidential bid, and I think Democrats learned from this or are learning from it, in 2024 didn't begin in 2024. It began in 2020 when he refused to accept the results of the last election. And this isn't to say that Democrats should try to say 2024 was stolen or rigged or anything like that. What it is to say is that he maintained political dominance, political notability, and did so with his endorsements of candidates. He did so with his rallies, with his launching of the Save America PAC, with all of these things, and actually did announce about 2 years out before the election, earlier than any other Democrat, earlier than Biden did in 2019, earlier than Clinton did in 2015, earlier than he did the first time he ran for president. And there was reason for that, because shaping the narrative early on is extremely important. And I think people, like those with the political savvy, like Pritzker, know that. And when you do things like this, you are 5 months in, 6 months into the year, and you're already announcing you're running for a third term. In many cases, incumbents just file in Congress and don't actually do any formal launch until January. Because Pritzker won't face any primary opposition that is noteworthy. He won't face pushback across the state. He's well liked within the party and across the general voting constituency. After all, it is a blue state. But it's noteworthy that he's choosing now to do this, making this announcement, making it big, and is going to do so in a way that makes his name still common in the mainstream media space, in the average Democratic Party household, and that is what the purpose is. And so I think we will watch 2028 unfold very early on in a way that I don't think we watched 2020 unfold that early on. John Delaney was a very early announcer, but he was really the only one. And even at this point, he wasn't announced, and there wasn't an expectation that he would be running for president. But in 2028, in 2025 now, we're in a much different position. And many Democrats are gearing up in ways that we simply might not have expected under the first Trump administration, but is relevant and necessary under this one. So keep your eye out on candidates like J.B. Pritzker, people who very much seem like they're inkling to run for president of the United States because they drop hints and you can read the tea leaves. And this one is glaring right at us. And so have to watch it, have to keep your eye out on it because it's very important for 2028 and you can learn a lot from some of the simple decisions that these politicians make that often track to a much larger one later down the line. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2028 presidential election and analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.